Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt invisible? What if one night the richest man in the city handed you a golden invitation, not out of respect, but as a joke? What if you were the cleaning lady and they expected you not to show up? Would you go? Would you walk into that grand hall, knowing every eye would question your right to be there, knowing they'd already written your story before you even said a word? This is not a tale of revenge or glamour. It's the journey of a woman who never asked for attention, only dignity. A mother, a daughter, an artist who traded paint for practicality. Until one night, she made a choice that changed not only how others saw her, but how she saw herself. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever questioned whether you belong, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss a second of this powerful journey. Now, let's begin. The clock struck 8:00 p.m., and the Langford Towers penthouse conference room shimmered under the glow of golden pendant lights. It was a crisp autumn night in Chicago. The skyline outside looked like it had been hand-stitched into the horizon, and inside, the room smelled of polished oak, leather, and scotch. Walter Langford sat at the head of the table, fingers laced, back straight. At 52, he carried himself with the kind of presence that didn't need to be loud. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, his tailored navy suit immaculate. He wasn't one to laugh easily, but when he did, people listened. Most assumed he'd been born into wealth. But truth was, he had built Langford Financial from scratch, brick by quiet brick. Tonight wasn't about business. Not officially. It was the monthly poker night. Just four men in expensive suits, trying to beat each other with bluff and bravado. Place your bets. Gentlemen, Charles Reed said with a grin that stretched too wide. Charles had been Walter's friend since college, a talker, a teaser, the kind of man who didn't believe in silence. He tossed his chips with flair, whiskey glass in hand, eyes darting for mischief. We've been doing this for years, he continued, and it's always the same. Win money, lose money, yawn. So tonight, let's spice things up. Walter raised a brow. Spice a friendly wager, Charles said, leaning back. Loser of the final hand has to bring a date to the Eleanor's Gala next week. Sounds harmless enough. Ethan chimed in, swirling his drink. Wait for it, Charles said. But not just any date. No trophy wives. No models from downtown. The loser has to ask someone. Unexpected. Walter's fingers drummed once on the table. Define unexpected. A cleaning lady, Charles said, voice steady. Someone from this very building. Uniform and all. You lose. You ask. No excuses. The room paused. Ethan chuckled. A low, indulgent sound. You're not serious. Oh. I am, Charles replied. Come on. It'll be harmless fun. The gala's stiff anyway. Let's shake the diamonds a little. Walter said nothing at first. He took a long sip of his scotch. His eyes didn't blink, but his jaw twitched. He looked out the window. The Sears Tower blinked back at him. Down below, the city buzzed, unaware. He knew it was a stupid idea, cruel, even. But something about the challenge, that old itch for control, flickered inside him. All right, he said, quietly. Deal the cards. And just like that, the bet was on. They played for hours, each hand drawing in more tension. Walter, always calculating, kept a steady lead. He knew their tells. Ethan always tapped twice when he bluffed. Charles bit the inside of his cheek when he had a good hand. But then the final hand came. A full house in Walter's grasp. Confident, he pushed in the chips, watching Charles follow. When the cards turned, it wasn't Charles who lost. It was Walter. A straight flush beat his full house. The room fell silent for a beat, and then erupted in laughter. Langford Charles slapped the table, laughing until he wheezed. Looks like you're taking Cinderella to the ball after all. Walter didn't flinch, not visibly, but deep inside, something soured. He didn't mind losing. What bothered him was that he had agreed, and now had to honor a joke that felt like a slap to someone else's dignity. Still, a bet was a bet. The next morning, Walter walked through the halls of Langford Tower alone, suit impeccable, expression unreadable. On the 28th floor, a woman in a gray uniform mopped the marble tiles near the elevator bank. She wore her chestnut hair tied back in a messy bun, earbuds in, eyes on the floor. Walter had seen her before, he was sure. Not her face, exactly, but the way she moved steady, quiet, invisible to most. He didn't speak to her. Not yet. Instead, back in his office, he pulled out an embossed gala invitation and scribbled a note in pen. To the cleaning lady on 28, join me at Eleanor's Hall. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. W.L. No flowers, no explanation, no signature flourish. He folded it once, slipped it into an envelope. Later that day, on his way to a meeting, he passed by the same hallway, now empty. He dropped the envelope into the janitor's cart without a word. He didn't even look back. He told himself it didn't matter, that she wouldn't come. But something in his chest said otherwise. The building was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old vents and the low hum of fluorescent lights. It was just past 10:30 p.m. when Clara Jensen rolled her cleaning cart onto the 28th floor. Her shoulders ached, and her left shoe had started to rub the inside of her heel again. But she didn't complain. She never did. Clara moved like a shadow, purposeful, present, yet easy to overlook. Her earbuds played a soft tune from an old folk playlist. The voice of James Taylor drifted gently into her ears as she wiped down the polished elevator buttons and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She paused at the hallway's end, near the executive wing. This floor always felt colder sleek, sterile, like a showroom no one actually lived in. The offices belonged to people with titles on glass doors and photos of sailboats on their walls. One in particular always stood out, Walter Langford. She had seen him, of course. Tall, still, precise. The kind of man who didn't waste a movement or a word. He walked like the hallway already belonged to him before it was built. He had never spoken to her, not directly, but once, about a year ago. He had held the elevator for her without a word. She remembered that. Small kindnesses stayed with Clara longer than most. At the end of the hall, she emptied the trash bin outside his office. Crumpled paper. A few empty espresso pods. The faint smell of cologne still clung to the air. As she was about to tie off the liner, something heavy shifted in the bottom. She reached in and pulled out a white envelope thicker than usual, the kind used for wedding invitations or legal documents. Curious, She turned it over. Her name wasn't on it. In fact, no name at all. Just a handwritten line. To the cleaning lady on 28, join me at Eleanor's Hall. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. W. L. Clara blinked. She read it again. And then again. Her first instinct was that it was a mistake, meant for someone else. Maybe a different floor. Maybe a joke. But there it was, in neat, unmistakable handwriting. Eleanor's Hall. Walter Langford. The letter swirled like a ripple in still water. She stood in the hallway for a moment, envelope in hand, completely alone in the silence. Then she laughed, just a quiet, single breath that left her lips before she could stop it. Was this real? She looked around, half expecting someone to pop out from behind a potted plant with a camera. But no one came. Back in the janitor's closet, she sat down on an overturned bucket, envelope still in her hand. Her mind ran wild with questions. Is this some kind of prank? Did I do something wrong? But the note wasn't cruel. It was short, strange, a little impersonal. Maybe, but it wasn't insulting. Clara knew how people looked at her. Some ignored her. Some smiled politely, but never asked her name. A few talked too much, using her silence as a place to dump their complaints. She'd been mistaken for a temp more than once, but never invited to a gala. She hadn't worn a dress since her sister's wedding 7 years ago. She hadn't been in a room filled with tuxedos and champagne since, well, maybe never. She thought about throwing the envelope away. She nearly did. But something about the way her name wasn't there made it feel like a test, like someone wasn't sure she'd show up at all, and that made her want to go. The next morning, Clara took a detour on her way home, stopping by the small house in the suburbs where her mother, June, lived. The screen door squeaked as she entered, the scent of cinnamon and old books wrapping around her like a blanket. Clara, her mother called from the kitchen. "It's just me," she answered, placing the envelope gently on the table. June emerged, wrapped in her faded blue robe, a cup of tea in hand. Her gray hair was pulled into a loose bun. Her face looked tired, but she smiled when she saw her daughter. "Rough night?" she asked. Clara handed her the invitation. "Read this." June adjusted her glasses, scanned the card, then looked up with a bemused expression. "Is this real?" Clara sat down, resting her chin on her palm. It was in the trash outside Langford's office. "I don't know what to make of it." June stared at her for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe it's exactly what it looks like." Clara scoffed. "A billionaire inviting the janitor to a gala? Doesn't that sound like a setup for a bad joke, or the start of a better story?" June said. "You going? I don't even own a dress." "Then let's fix that." They didn't have money for anything fancy, but June still had her old sewing machine. She had worked as a seamstress in her younger days. Together, they dug out fabric from the attic, an old bolt of dark green velvet, soft as a whisper, still wrapped in plastic. By evening, June had sketched a pattern, measuring Clara's arms and waist while humming under her breath. "You'll look beautiful," she said, threading the needle. "I don't know if I'll fit in," Clara whispered. June paused. "Then make them fit around you." And for the first time in a long while, Clara smiled, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. At first glance, Clara Jensen blended into the world like wallpaper. She moved quietly, spoke only when needed, and made herself smaller in rooms that never asked for her opinion. But beneath the gray uniform and silent corridors of Langford Tower, Clara was a woman shaped by color, memories dipped in cobalt blue, ochre sunsets, and the soft greens of Midwest fields after spring rain. She hadn't always been invisible. Years ago, in a different life, Clara had filled blank canvases with movement and fire. Her garage studio in Lincolnwood still held the scent of turpentine, though the easel now sat draped in a painter's dropcloth and dust. She used to paint at dawn, barefoot, coffee in hand, her young son's laughter echoing from the next room. Back then, she believed in light, that no matter how small, it would find its way in. But that belief dimmed the day she left her marriage. Michael, her ex-husband, had once been gentle, with a crooked smile and a voice like radio jazz. But time revealed sharper edges, long silences that followed her laughter, cold glares over burnt toast, arguments about money, about her hobby that never paid. He didn't like mess, didn't like noise, didn't like color. So, she dimmed her voice, packed away her brushes, and tried to keep the peace. It wasn't until her son Ethan turned 6 that she realized she had become a stranger in her own home. When he asked her, "Mom, why don't you smile when you paint anymore?" she knew it was time. The divorce was quiet but heavy. She gave up the house, took only what she needed, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near her mother's home. Custody agreements were drawn, and Ethan stayed mostly with his father private school, travel soccer, a life Clara couldn't afford to compete with. Still, she called every night, and on weekends. When Ethan visited, they painted rocks together and lined them up along the window ledge like treasures. Then June's heart started acting up. At first, it was fatigue, then shortness of breath. Clara took on extra shifts, gave up her mural commissions, and quietly applied for a full-time janitorial position with health insurance. Langford Enterprises was hiring. The pay was steady. The hours were long, but it was something she could depend on. People often assumed that women like her had made mistakes, that cleaning was a consequence, not a choice. They were wrong. Clara wasn't running from her past. She was carrying it, slowly, carefully, like a porcelain bowl with a crack down the middle. It still held water. It just couldn't be dropped again. That week, after the strange invitation, she found herself drifting into old routines she had long abandoned. At night, after her shift, she opened her sketchbook again. The pages still smelled like graphite and dreams. She drew dresses, long lines, soft curves, deep shades of green that reminded her of the fabric her mother had found. She scribbled notes, made lists. Shoes borrow from June. Hair soft waves, natural. Earrings, silver drops. Nothing too loud, but it wasn't just about the dress. It was about the way she walked into that room. She knew how it would look. A janitor among jewel-toned gowns and champagne towers. Whispers behind manicured hands. She could hear them already. But she wasn't going for them. She was going for herself. Maybe she needed to know what would happen if she stopped hiding. One evening, as she rested her head on her mother's lap, June softly ran her fingers through Clara's hair. The television murmured in the background. Forgotten. "You were always brave," June said, almost to herself. Clara smiled, eyes closed. "I'm not sure if this is brave or stupid." "Sometimes," June replied. They looked the same from the outside. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes not from amusement, but from understanding. The night before the gala, Clara stood in front of her apartment's cracked mirror. The dress fit like a second skin, modest, flowing, with a subtle slit at the side. June had added hand-stitched accents to the hem, tiny vines that shimmered when she moved. Her makeup was minimal, just enough to feel seen. Ethan had called earlier. "Mom, you're going to look like a queen," he'd said, voice full of admiration. She wished he could see her, but she had promised Michael not to involve him. Not yet. She turned off the bathroom light and stepped into the hallway. June sat on the couch, knitting half a scarf. But when she looked up and saw Clara, her eyes welled with tears. "You remind me of your grandmother," she whispered, "the first time she went dancing after the war." Clara nodded, heart thudding like a soft drum beat. She wasn't sure what she'd find at Eleanor's hall, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't walk in like a cleaning lady. She would walk in like a woman who had something to say, even if she said nothing at all. On Thursday morning, the city was wrapped in a curtain of gray. A gentle drizzle kissed the windows of the Jensen apartment, streaking the glass in quiet rhythms. Inside, the scent of strong coffee mingled with cinnamon toast. June sat at the kitchen table, her knitting needles resting beside a folded scarf she never quite finished. Clara stood in the doorway, barefoot, arms crossed, staring at the green velvet dress now hanging from the closet door. It looked so still, so certain, more certain than she felt. She had barely slept the night before. Her mind had replayed every possible version of the evening to come arriving at Eleanor's hall, walking past crystal chandeliers and velvet ropes, eyes following her like whispers. Some looks would be curious, others unkind. "What are you doing here?" She imagined them asking without saying a word, but beneath the fear, there was something else, something quieter, steadier, resolve, the kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice, but stands when no one else does. By noon, Clara was ready. She had packed a small bag and brushed her hair into soft waves. She pressed the dress with careful hands, checking each stitch her mother had sewn. "Are you sure you want to do this?" June asked from the sofa, a quiet tremble in her voice. Clara looked down at her hands. "No." Then she looked back up. "But I'm doing it anyway. The car service arrived at 6:45 sharp. Not a limousine, just a sleek black sedan Walter's assistant had arranged earlier that day." The driver nodded politely as he opened the door. As the city passed by outside the window, Clara caught glimpses of herself in the reflection green velvet against raindrops, eyes steady, lips bare but strong. By 7:25 Mem. They arrived at Eleanor's hall. It was a place made for spectacle. Marble steps stretched wide beneath golden sconces. Inside, the glow of chandeliers spilled across polished wood floors. Guests in tuxedos and silk gowns mingled beneath towering arrangements of white lilies and orchids. The hum of live jazz filled the air, soft and elegant. Clara stepped out of the car and onto the wet pavement. Her heels clicked against stone, each step louder than it felt in her chest. She paused at the base of the steps, holding her small black clutch like a shield. A valet approached. "Invitation?" "Ma'am." She handed it over. The young man glanced at the card, then at her. For a moment, she thought he might say something, but he didn't. "Welcome," he said simply, opening the door with a bow. Inside, the temperature changed. The air was warmer, thicker. Laughter swirled like perfume. Champagne glasses clinked gently. Clara stood at the threshold, suddenly aware of every eye not yet looking, but sure to turn. Then the string quartet fell into silence. A pause, a murmur, and then, like the hush before a storm, every head began to turn. She felt it before she saw it. A shift in the room, a recognition without words. The woman in the red dress, because though the fabric was green, her presence was red, bold, burning. She moved slowly through the room, each step deliberate. Her dress shimmered beneath the lights, not loud, just enough. Her hair fell in soft waves over one shoulder, framing her face in shadows and resolve. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" Another voice replied, "I don't know, but she's not on the guest list." Walter Langford stood near the bar, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. He had been in the middle of some casual conversation, something about real estate and foreign investors, but the words had already left him. When he saw Clara enter, time bent around him. He hadn't known what to expect. He thought maybe she wouldn't come. Or if she did, maybe she'd stay near the edge of the room, a quiet observer, hidden in safe colors. But she didn't. She walked like she belonged, not as a guest, as a presence. Walter set down his glass, straightened his cuffs, and began moving toward her. As he passed through the crowd, people stepped aside, not because of who he was, but because of what they felt between them. When he reached her, Clara stopped. So did the music. For a moment, there was only the sound of breath, fabric, and the distant tapping of rain against the windows. Walter looked at her, not the dress, not the shoes, not the way she had suddenly quieted the entire hall, but her, the same woman he'd passed in countless hallways, the one who had emptied his trash, mopped his floors, and now, the one who had just rewritten the rules of the room without saying a word. He offered his hand. She didn't take it right away. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, just enough for him to hear her say, "I hope I'm not ruining your evening." His lips twitched, just barely. "You've done the opposite," he said. And for the first time in years, Walter Langford smiled in a way that reached his eyes. They stood like that, two people from two different worlds, at the center of a room, suddenly uncertain who it belonged to. And for just one beat longer, neither of them moved. Because in that moment, they weren't janitor and CEO. They were simply Clara and Walter. For several seconds, silence stretched like silk through the grand hall. It wasn't empty silence. It was full of confusion, curiosity, and something else that no one could quite name. Walter Langford, for all his practiced composure, stood motionless. His hand still hovered in the air between them, waiting, offering, unsure. And then Clara took it, just a light touch, her fingers resting against his palm. Enough to steady the room and unsteady him. The music resumed in the background, soft jazz winding around crystal chandeliers. But the focus had shifted. People still watched, some with furrowed brows, some with widened eyes. A few with hidden smirks they thought Clara wouldn't notice. She noticed. She always noticed. "You weren't joking," she said under her breath, voice quiet enough to remain just between them. Walter tilted his head slightly, as if weighing the words. Would you have come if I were Clara didn't answer? She let her silence speak. They moved through the crowd together, not arm in arm, but side by side. A ripple followed them, like the wake behind a boat. Questions floated between guests like perfume. Do you know who she is? She's staff. Langford's making a point. Maybe she's a donor in disguise. The conversations blurred behind Clara like city lights through rain. She focused on the floor ahead, the flicker of candlelight on glass, the faint reflection of her heels against the polished wood. Her fingers gripped her clutch tighter. At the refreshment table, Walter gestured toward a tray. Would you like a drink? She looked at the flutes of champagne, all bubbling softly like secrets. No, she said, her voice gentle. I'd like to breathe. He nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. They found a quiet corner near the terrace doors. A few guests offered half smiles, a couple of nods. One woman in a sapphire dress gave Clara a long, deliberate glance up and down. Not cruel, just cataloging. And then the woman leaned toward Walter with a laugh far too loud to be natural. Walter, darling, she said, you didn't tell us you'd brought company. He offered a polite smile. She's not company. She's Clara. The woman blinked, as if the name should have come with a resume. Clara extended her hand. Nice to meet you. The woman shook it, fingers limp. Likewise. Her smile was thin enough to slice fruit. When she walked away, Walter let out a breath. That was Eleanor Grayson? The hall's named after her. Clara raised an eyebrow. Then I guess I just ruined her evening. Only if she was expecting to be the most interesting woman here. There it was again, that flicker of amusement. The one Clara hadn't expected from a man like him. He was composed, yes. But he wasn't unkind. Still, kindness didn't erase reality. She could feel it in her skin. The heat of being looked at, the weight of being other. Across the room, Charles Reed watched with a glass of scotch in one hand and a grin just this side of smug. When their eyes met, Clara didn't blink. She held his stare. He raised his glass in mock salute. And for a moment, Clara felt the full sting of the setup. This wasn't a moment of inclusion. This had started as entertainment. A dare. A trick. She stepped back from the terrace rail, letting the music fall behind her like a closing curtain. I need air, she said. Walter moved, but she held up a hand, alone, outside. The city stretched beneath her, a quiet sprawl of lights and motion. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wet stone and roses from the lobby display. She closed her eyes, counted to 5, and breathed. She had walked into the room. She had looked them in the eye. She had not hidden. That mattered. It had to. Behind her. The door opened. Footsteps approached, soft. Careful. I'm sorry, Walter said. Clara turned. For what? For making it feel like this. You didn't make me feel anything. Walter? She replied. They did. He nodded once, slowly. Still, I didn't think it through. She tilted her head. Did you ever? He didn't answer. She studied his face. Calm. Unreadable. The way powerful men learn to be. But there was something in his eyes tonight. Something not polished. Something honest. I've spent years making rooms like that feel comfortable for people like them, he said. But tonight, I realized I don't even like most of them. Clara laughed quiet. Sharp. Then why invite them? Because I forgot there were other choices. They stood in silence again, the city humming below them. Walter stepped closer. Clara, he said gently, you turned the room upside down without saying a word. She met his gaze. You think that's impressive? I think that's terrifying. She smiled. Then not a wide smile, but one that reached the corners of her eyes. Good, she said. The door opened again behind them. Murmurs, music, movement. Are you ready to go back in? Walter asked. Clara glanced at the hall, then at him. Not yet, she said. And for once, someone waited. Not for her to leave, but for her to lead. When Clara stepped back into the ballroom, the warmth struck her again, soft light bouncing off mirrored walls. Voices low and polished, the familiar rustle of gowns and clink of glassware. But something was different. This time, the room didn't swallow her. It adjusted. She moved across the floor with quiet purpose, like a ripple returning to the surface. Guests parted without looking directly, like leaves shifting with the breeze. Walter followed a few steps behind, not as an escort, but as someone who had been invited into her space, not the other way around. At the center of the room, a jazz trio began to play a slow, bluesy number, the kind of melody that didn't need lyrics to speak. Walter approached again, offering a hand once more. No pressure this time, no expectation. Would you dance? He asked. Clara hesitated, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what this would mean. A janitor, a billionaire, in the center of Chicago, society's finest hour. She looked him in the eyes. Only if you can keep up. He smiled just slightly, and they stepped into the music. It was not a perfect dance. Walter was precise but stiff. Clara, fluid and light on her feet. He moved like a man used to leading. She moved like someone who had learned to follow only when it suited her. And yet, something clicked. They turned slowly, step by careful step, under the chandeliers. Around them, the whispers started again, but softer this time. Not amused. Curious. People didn't know what to do with a woman like Clara Jensen. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. She didn't play the role they expected. And that unsettled them. But it also intrigued them. Near the edge of the dance floor, Charles Reed watched, arms crossed, drink untouched. Beside him, a fashion editor leaned toward him. Is she his new assistant? Charles chuckled. She's the janitor. The woman blinked, then turned her attention back to Clara, her gaze narrowing. Well, she's dressed better than half the room. That much was true. June's handmade green velvet gown moved with Clara like wind in tall grass. Every stitch held a story, every fold, a decision. It wasn't loud, but it demanded presence, mid-dance. Clara looked up at Walter. Why me? She asked, voice low enough not to interrupt the rhythm. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he spun her gently, then caught her again. Because you made me look twice. Once wasn't enough, no, he said softly. Not for someone who'd spent years only looking at the surface. She studied him. Really studied him for the first time that evening. The lines near his eyes. The stiffness in his jaw. The way he seemed to stand straighter around people and breathe easier alone. You look tired, she said, not unkindly. He laughed under his breath. It takes a lot of energy pretending to be the man they think I am. And who are you really? Walter's steps faltered, not visibly, but enough that she felt it. I don't know, he said. It was the truest thing he'd said all night. When the music slowed and the final note lingered like a sigh, they stepped apart. Applause rising around them, not loud, but genuine. Even Charles clapped, albeit with a smirk. Clara gave a small nod to the trio in thanks, then turned to Walter. I need a drink now. He chuckled. Allow me. At the bar. She sipped sparkling water, ignoring the flute of champagne the bartender had tried to place in front of her. Walter leaned on the counter beside her. Do you do this often? Unnerve entire rooms, only when I mop them, she replied, her eyes sparkling. He laughed again, this time unguarded. A few guests glanced over, surprised to hear Walter Langford laugh like that. It was the sound of something unspooling quietly, but inevitably, nearby. A woman in a navy gown leaned over. I just wanted to say, she murmured to Clara, you look radiant. Clara blinked, then nodded. Thank you. And brave, the woman added, before slipping back into the crowd. Clara wasn't sure which compliment meant more. As the evening wore on, the room warmed to her. A few approached to speak, some cautiously, others sincerely. She told a story about a champagne spill from last year's gala, how no one confessed. But the heel print gave them away. Laughter followed. And just like that, she wasn't the janitor anymore. She was Clara, a woman who had been invited as a joke, but chose to arrive as herself. The gala ended with warm lights fading into softer music, laughter trailing off into the night, and camera flashes sparking like fireflies in velvet dusk. But Clara Jensen left quietly. No spotlight, no exit announcement. Just a slow walk down the marble steps of Eleanor's hall. Her green velvet dress brushing lightly against her heels. The wind was sharp that night, slipping under her collar and reminding her the world outside hadn't changed just because one room had. Walter offered to drive her home. She said no. She needed the silence, needed to feel the night against her skin without someone else's shadow beside her. She rode the subway home, clutching her small clutch to her chest, head bowed, pretending not to notice the stares from a couple still dressed in gala attire a few seats down. Maybe they recognized her. Maybe they didn't. Either way, the air felt different now. Not just around her, but inside her. That night, Clara stood in front of her bathroom mirror for a long time. She didn't take off the dress right away. Instead, she looked at her own reflection like she was meeting herself for the first time in years. Not just the cleaner, not just the daughter, not just the woman who let her dreams wither out of necessity, but someone who showed up. Someone who walked into a room she was never meant to survive and stood tall. The next morning, her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. It started with a message from Sophie, another overnight cleaner at Langford Tower. Girl, you're everywhere. Like, everywhere. Then came the links, photos, headlines, tweets. Who was the mystery woman with Walter Langford janitor or socialite green velvet stuns at Charity Gala? Langford's Cinderella moment, a fairy tale, or a PR stunt. Her image was everywhere, her face quiet, unreadable. Elegance circulated through blogs and gossip pages. Some praised her, others didn't. The comment sections were worse. Must be sleeping with him. That's how it always starts. She's just looking for money. Come on, cleaning lady, please. There's no way she bought that dress herself. And just like that, The glass slipper shattered. By noon, reporters were calling her building. Someone had snapped a photo of her taking out trash the week before. Another leaked a picture of her mother outside the pharmacy. June called her in a panic. "Clara, baby, what's happening? There's a man with a camera across the street." Clara's chest tightened. "Don't open the door for anyone. I'm coming." When she arrived, June was sitting on the couch, her hands trembling slightly, heart monitor beeping softly by her side. Clara closed the blinds, shut off the phone, and held her mother close. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know this would happen." But she had. Part of her had. The moment she stepped into that room, she knew her world might not be the same. But she hadn't expected this. That night, Walter called. She didn't pick up. He texted, "I didn't know they'd come after you. I'm sorry. Please let me help." She stared at the screen for a long time before placing the phone face down. She didn't want help. She wanted quiet, wanted her name back, wanted the space to exist without being someone else's story. By the end of the week, 2 tabloids had published an article about her previous marriage. One twisted it into a sob story. The other painted her as an opportunist. Both made her feel like a caricature. The final straw came Saturday morning. A man knocked on the door, flashing a fake smile and a press badge. "Ms. Jensen," he said. "Just a few questions. Our readers would love to hear how you went from mop bucket to mansion." She didn't speak, didn't blink. She just closed the door, hard. The sound echoed down the hall. She pressed her back against it and slid to the floor, arms around her knees, breath tight in her chest. Inside, June moved slowly toward her, placing a warm hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You didn't ask for this," she said softly. "No," Clara whispered, "but I walked into it." June sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The room was dim, safe. But Clara knew she couldn't hide here forever. She had a choice. She could disappear, let the headlines write her out, or she could speak, tell her story on her own terms. But she didn't know how yet. Didn't know if she had the strength to fight a war she never meant to start. And somewhere in the back of her mind, one question kept circling like smoke. Was it worth it? 3 days passed in silence. No news interviews. No returned calls. No curious walks outside. Clara Jensen stayed indoors. Curtains drawn. Phone off. Television volume low. The media circus raged on outside. But inside her mother's small home, everything was still. She spent most of her time by the window, not watching the world, but facing it, just sitting with the weight of it all pressing into her chest like bricks. Walter Langford had sent flowers twice. She didn't read the cards. She left them in their wrapping by the door, like something too delicate to touch and too expensive to throw away. On the 4th day, he came himself. He didn't call, didn't text, just knocked. June opened the door, her voice quiet. "She doesn't want to talk." "I understand," he said, but he waited anyway. On the front porch, in his pressed navy coat, for an hour, then 2, until Clara stepped outside, slowly, her arms crossed, hair pulled back, face bare. Walter rose from the steps. "Clara." She didn't answer, just sat beside him, leaving a cautious space between them. The late afternoon light painted everything gold, but their shadows stretched long and cold. "They turned you into a story," he said. "Finally." She stared straight ahead. And you gave them the first page. Walter swallowed. That wasn't the intention, but it was the result. He nodded. I know. Silence. Not angry. Just heavy. Clara looked down at her hands, fingers twisting together. You brought me into a room as a joke? No, he said firmly. That part wasn't a joke. She turned to him. Then what was it I didn't know? He admitted. Not at first. Maybe I thought it would be interesting. A distraction. A challenge to the room. But then you showed up. And I realized you weren't a statement. You were a person. Her eyes glistened. But no tears fell. Too late for that realization, she whispered. I know, he repeated. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired money could fix, but the kind that came from carrying regret in silence. I saw the things they wrote about you, he said. I tried to stop it, tried to speak to a few outlets, and that made it worse. Clara cut in. Now they think I'm part of your rebranding arc. He flinched. I'm not your cause. Walter, she added. I'm not your proof of empathy. I don't want you to be, he said, voice rough. I just wanted to do the right thing, but I kept doing the wrong ones. She didn't reply right away. Only the sound of a passing car filled the space between them. Then Clara asked, almost to herself, why is it that when a man like you makes a mistake, the world calls it a misunderstanding, but when a woman like me shows up at a party, they call it a scandal? Walter didn't answer. He couldn't. She stood, brushing her palms on her jeans. I didn't want this. Any of this. I just wanted to be seen. Just once. Not for pity. Not for spectacle. Just as myself. You were, Walter said softly. By me. Eventually. Clara nodded. But by then, it didn't matter anymore. She turned to leave, but paused. You want to help me? She asked. He rose slowly. Yes. Then stop sending flowers. Stop calling reporters. Just let me breathe. And with that, she walked back inside, the screen door creaking shut behind her. Walter remained on the porch a moment longer, staring at the place where she had been. There were no clever comebacks, no strategic apologies. Some things, he realized, couldn't be fixed with money or intention. They just had to be felt. And sometimes, when words no longer worked, silence had to speak for them. Walter Langford didn't return to Langford Tower for 4 days. No meetings, no calls, no boardroom dinners. In a world that ran on urgency, his absence made noise in places he wasn't used to being noticed. Investors whispered. Assistants speculated. Charles Reed called twice, then stopped. But Walter wasn't hiding. He was building. In a quiet wing of the corporate headquarters, one rarely used and long abandoned, a space had been left to rot. It was once intended as a design suite. Natural light had never reached it. The windows were never installed. The walls were raw drywall and insulation, cold, forgotten. Until Walter walked in with 2 things, blueprints and intention. He didn't speak much to the contractors, just handed them a folder with precise instructions. No gold trim, no corporate logos, no recognition plaques. What he was building was not a project. It was an apology. Not the kind you send with flowers, the kind you earn. By day 3, it started to take shape: soft lighting, movable easels, shelves filled with brushes and canvas, a small library with books on color theory and women artists, a nook with a bench and a hot tea station. and on one wall, a quiet quote, "Hand-painted to be seen is to survive. To be understood is to live." No names attached, no photos, just space. And when it was done, he sent a message to Clara through Sophie, quietly, without pressure. "There's a room on the third floor now. No expectations. It's just there. If you want to see it." He didn't wait for a response, didn't visit the room again, not even once. 3 days later, Clara stepped into the Langford Tower for the first time since the gala. She wore no makeup. Her gray uniform hung lightly on her frame, familiar and functional. Most staff looked at her with awkward smiles. A few offered nods of solidarity. One security guard whispered, "You looked beautiful that night," before returning to his post like nothing had happened. Clara didn't linger. She made her way to the elevator, pressed the button for the third floor, and stepped into the room without windows. It smelled of cedarwood and acrylic. The light was soft, indirect, bouncing gently off the cream walls. A canvas sat blank on the main easel. A fresh box of oil pastels rested beside it. She walked in slowly, hand brushing the edge of a maple shelf. The tea station hummed softly. And for the first time in years, she felt still, not watched, not judged, just still. On a side table, a small envelope rested, her name in simple handwriting. Inside, "You once said you just wanted to be seen. I see you now. This is not a favor. It's not a gift. It's a space you already deserved." She folded the letter, placed it back, and sat on the bench near the window that wasn't there. Then she wept. Not because she was broken, but because someone had finally given her a room that asked nothing of her. That same night, she returned home and pulled out her sketchbook. She didn't paint that evening. She just drew lines, soft ones, jagged ones. A window frame, half open, a woman standing behind it, not looking out, but looking in. June walked by the door, paused, and smiled. "You're healing," she said. Clara didn't answer. She just nodded, because she was. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The cameras moved on. The world, as it always does, found new stories to chase, new people to consume, new spectacles to devour. And Clara Jensen quietly stepped back into the space between the noise. But something had changed. Not the world. Her. She returned to work at Langford Tower with no fanfare, no more whispers in the hallway, just quiet nods, the kind that said, "We know, we remember, but we also respect the silence." Every few days, she visited the room on the third floor. She never told anyone. She didn't owe an explanation. Sometimes she painted. Sometimes she just sat. Sometimes she made tea and read a few pages of an old poetry book she'd once owned in college. Each time, she left a little lighter, a little more herself. One Thursday afternoon, she found a fresh canvas already placed on the easel. No note, no signature, just a simple card tucked into the edge that read, "What does your silence look like?" Clara smiled. That day, she painted, not with color first, but with charcoal, soft grays and shadows, a bench, a coat hanging on a wall, a single cup of tea steaming gently in an empty room, and in the center, a window frame. No glass, no view, just the outline. She titled it, "The Window That Wasn't There." When she finished, she didn't frame it. She didn't display it. She just left it there and walked away. Later that week, she found Walter Langford waiting by the elevator. not in his usual pressed suit, but in a plain coat and scarf. No assistant, no briefcase, just him. I saw the painting, he said. Clara gave a small nod. Was it for me, he asked. No, she replied. It was for me. He looked relieved. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Clara asked, Do you still think it was worth it? He looked at her, eyes steady. Every second? She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. They took the elevator down together. On the ground floor, just before the doors opened, Clara said softly, The world doesn't change because you invited someone in once. I know, Walter replied. That's why I won't stop. She turned to him, truly looking, not as the man who started it all, not as the one who almost broke her, but as someone who had learned to listen. She offered him a quiet nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. That night, she walked home with the breeze at her back. No cameras, no stairs, just the hum of street lamps and the rhythm of her own breath. At home, June was baking again. The scent of nutmeg and brown sugar wrapped the apartment like a memory. Clara kissed her mother's cheek, pulled off her shoes, and sat by the window. The real one, not the one in her painting. This one was cracked on one edge and stuck halfway when opened. But it looked out onto the street, where the lights flickered and people passed and lives moved on. She rested her chin on her hand and whispered to the wind, I'm still here. Life reflection from the window that wasn't there. A message for the heart at its core. This story reminds us that dignity doesn't come from titles or clothes. It comes from presence, truth, and quiet strength. Clara Jensen didn't storm into the world demanding to be seen. She simply stopped hiding. And in doing so, she confronted not only the judgment of others, but also the small voice inside that once told her she wasn't enough. For those of us who have spent decades caring for others, working quietly behind the scenes, or enduring life's silent disappointments, Clara's journey speaks deeply. It asks, at what point do we finally choose ourselves? It's never too late to reclaim a piece of who we are, whether it's through creativity, courage, or simply stepping into a room we've been taught wasn't ours. We are allowed to take up space. Let the story be a gentle nudge. You matter. Your story matters. And sometimes, the window you thought was missing was always within. No matter your age, it's never too late to be seen. Truly seen. Because healing isn't loud, it's real. And it begins when we stop apologizing for simply being. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, reminded you of something you felt, or simply made you pause for a moment, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing to our channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us continue telling the stories that matter. See you in the next one.